Hey everybody, Steve the amateur historian. How y'all doing? Now, coming to you from not quite Waterfront Park, almost Waterfront Park, right across the street. Along Nato Parkway, which is kind of generally where Front Avenue would have been, an area that just would have been lined. Both sides of the street would have just been lined with all these old buildings, old businesses and whatnot. And unlike a lot of parts of Portland down by the waterfront, this is an area where there's actually still some prominent remains of good old days. This tall, thin building here was built in the late 1850s. This is the Halleck Macmillan building, which I've referenced a few times on my channel, and they're actually restoring it to how this is more how it used to look. This building looked, they redid it many years ago and it just looked hideous. It looked like just another box-shaped building, but they've restored it, or are in the process of finishing restoring it to how it looked. This is the oldest commercial building in the city of Portland. It was built in 1857. So you see, and even this building was built, I think, I want to say 1883. And this used to actually be an open lot. And it's this area over here that's actually pertinent to me today for a fresh episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So it's September 2nd, 1930. Not today, but once upon a time. And I kind of like these newer buildings because they kind of have a cast iron look to them. I at least appreciate them attempting to get that look that kind of fits with a lot of the older buildings in this area. But this stretch, again, like a lot of areas, just lined with various buildings and various businesses. And this is Pine Street, this intersection right here, Pine Street going off that way, Oak Street, the next intersection going down that way. And back in 1930, right in between these two areas, probably right about where this particular building is today, there was a second-hand shop run by a proprietor named Jacob Cohen. And, by all accounts, he was just, there was a lot of secondhand store owners, pawn shop proprietors. That was a very, very common thing. Obviously, it still exists in certain facets today, but it was much more prominent. Running a pawn shop down here was like running a Starbucks today. It was very, very common, very frequent. And on September 2nd, 1930, seemed to be just another day at work for Jacob Cohen. But he had a common tendency to go home for lunch. And on this particular day, his wife, Cohen's wife, was somewhat dumbfounded when, it got to be around noontime and Jacob didn't come home for lunch. And so Cohen's wife came down to the shop. I know a lot of people that ran their own shops. They were usually... That is loud. Usually people that ran their own shops in this area, especially if they were like these little thin 2 to 3 story buildings, I think a lot of times they, had their business ground level and lived upstairs. So I don't know if that was exactly the case here, but whatever the case, from wherever Jacob Cohen was living, his wife came down when he didn't show up for lunch, showed up at his store to discover that his door was locked, which was very out of character for him. And if he's at work, why would he have his door locked? He'd just be preventing customers from coming in. So I think probably at this point his wife is probably getting a little nervous. Why is his door locked? Why didn't he come home? Maybe he's having some big meeting with someone, who knows? But she did have a key. So it's a little bit after noon. She comes down to the store that again would have been located kind of right behind me generally, and opened the door, and she discovered the dead body of her husband, Jacob Cohen. He had been mercilessly ruthlessly beaten to death. He was propped up against a chair. He likely fell in that way, so he was kind of slumped up against a chair in his store. But he had just, like the description of it is, the most disturbing aspect of it, it seemed like stove parts had been used to just beat him. I'm guessing maybe he had stove parts in his store, maybe the killer had those items on him. But the most disturbing aspect of this attack was that it appeared, obviously his head had been beaten in. That was, the cause of death was just, blunt force trauma to the head. And it seemed that the instrument that was used to do that was probably the end of an axe. So someone just came into his store, Jacob Cohen's store. No one really knows why. Nobody can make any sense of why anybody would want to come and attack this guy. And if, it was a thief who was going to rob him for his goods, rob him for his money, you maybe have a pipe of some kind, you maybe have a knife, you have a gun possibly, but who comes charging into someone's establishment and hacking and beating them about the head till they die in their own establishment? I mean, either this was an incredibly, let's say, unskilled, inexperienced thief of some kind who showed up and didn't have their own weapons and maybe found an axe on the scene and just decided to use that. Maybe he came in, tried to act like a customer. I'm just spitballing because we don't really know exactly what happened. But maybe, he comes in, the assailant acts like a customer, walks around till he finds something that could potentially be used as a weapon and then just attacks Jacob Cohen with it. That's a possibility, but it's risky. What if he doesn't have anything that's gonna, fit your bill, and then you just gotta, do you just attack with your fists? Do you leave and then come back again later when you actually realize that if you're gonna rob a place, you probably should come with a weapon in hand? So I don't really know. But another question that just baffles the mind, because nobody can understand why anybody would want to attack Jacob Cohen, this just guy of the city, secondhand shop owner. Why would somebody come in, even if they were intending to rob him? Why would they come in and brutally, violently beat him to death in such a way? And it seems, because again, I saw reports, and obviously he was beaten in the head with an axe, but there was also these reports of stove parts. I don't know, like maybe the doors to a stove, the top part, but there was reports that he'd been beaten with pieces from a stove, which again, maybe he sold on his premises, but it almost makes me wonder if there was two assailants. If you have two, if you've got an axe and you're beating somebody and hacking away at somebody in the head with it, you don't need to pursue another weapon to beat them with. But whatever the case, it was a just troubling, grisly discovery here at what would have essentially been Front Street between Oak and Pine. And it was a baffling case because this guy didn't have any enemies, it seems. It was just nobody could figure out who would want to even do this guy harm in general, much less such a brutal. And stuff was strewn around. It was a violent attack, and it seemed like Jacob Cohen fought back best he could. But when you take a couple axe shots to the head, you're eventually going to go down. Now there was some theft. I know that there was reportedly a purse there. Maybe it was Jacob Cohen's wife's purse, but there was a purse that contained reportedly about $150, and that had gone missing during the attack. So there was some theft. But again, why? Maybe some guy came in, thought he'd have an easy go of it. Say, give me your stuff and I'll be out of here. Jacob Cohen said, the hell with that. This is my business. This is my livelihood. And maybe Jacob Cohen lashed out at him first. And, it could have been a real chaotic, messy affair. And the assailant, stumbled onto an axe that may have been, it was a secondhand shop. And, secondhand shops have all sorts of items laying around. And, there could have just been an axe, in the right place for this assailant, and that's why it ended up being as graphic as it was. It could have potentially been, just a intended robbery that just got completely out of hand. But still, I don't know. It seemed like a personal attack. And essentially, you know, there wasn't anything to go on, really, in the case. There was another store owner that lived on the street. I think his store was next door to Jacob Cohen's place, who said he saw somebody loitering on the sidewalk here, right? Kind of like, you know, if I wasn't vlogging, that's all, I'd be loitering on the sidewalk here. In the time seemingly shortly before Jacob Cohen was attacked, but nobody heard anything, nobody saw anything in terms of the attack itself, even though it seems like it would have been a very loud, violent, things crashing, people yelling, and it seems like there was nobody actually saw or heard the attack, the murder itself, but there was a guy seen loitering out on the street. Now, I only saw that in one newspaper article, and in that newspaper article, they provided no description of what this lurking individual looked like. So, even there, like, you know, the authorities maybe had something to go on, but I, as an investigator on this case, have nothing to go on. But right after the crime happened, and, you know, kind of nobody really knew, you know, what happened, who would want to do it, who would have a motive, all that stuff. Well, pretty quickly, police focused their attention on a man named Eugene Rogers. Now, Eugene Rogers was an African-American man. He did have a criminal record, but based on the information I saw, now granted, there could have been other newspaper articles done on this case that I never saw. There could have been more information, but in terms of who was responsible for the murder of Jacob Cohen at his shop right here, Eugene Rogers seemed to be kind of the beginning and the end in terms of the investigation. And the fact that he was an African-American gentleman, you know, makes you suspicious. Was this a convenient fall guy because, you know, he happened to not be white? So, you know, why not throw him under the bus for a crime that the police can't really seem to get a, you know, get a lead on? I'm gonna take a seat in front of the old Halleck McMillan building. It really is impressive what they've done to this place. You can see kind of where it met this building. That was very common for buildings to just kind of smash right into each other. But, you know, Eugene Rogers kind of became the guy that police focused on. They contemplated for a brief period that maybe it was an ex-employee of Jacob Cohen's, maybe someone he fired, who'd be pissed at him, and even in that vein, even if that was the reason, the brutal violence of the crime still seems to be a little bit over the top for someone who was just pissed because they lost their job. I've done cases on people. In fact, one block down, right over here, there was a guy named Isaac Bloom that ran a business, and he had a former employee that he fired, and several months later, that employee showed up and gunned him down right there in front of his, you know, fellow co-workers. Now, that guy also happened to be a morphine addict who was on morphine at the time, so, you know, take that for what you will in terms of this. But even hopped up on drugs and out of his mind, he just kind of came in and shot the guy. And, you know, it wasn't this brutal assault like this case. And essentially, because again, you know, in cases like this, especially, you know, older Portland, you know, anything you can use to make somebody who's not white look bad, you'll use it to your fullest advantage, and then try to attach that to something else that isn't even remotely related. So you've got this story of Jacob Cohen being brutally murdered, and then you've got this guy, Eugene Rogers. Now, this guy was obviously, you know, kind of a troubled soul, I would guess. But September 4th, so 2 days after, you know, the events transpired here with Jacob Cohen, and the police are out looking, you know, they don't have a suspect, so they're looking for anyone that they can, you know, anyone that they can just, you know, minutely make fit the bill. And in the case of Eugene Rogers, on September 4th, he was arrested. This is a very bizarre story. He was arrested after going to the home of a woman named Blanche Lambert with a gun in tow. And he forced her to cook him a meal and then forced her to sit there with him as he ate the meal. Like, this really, really weird encounter. And it doesn't seem like this was a woman that he was obsessed with, that he was stalking, and this was some weird expulsion of his deep inner weird fantasies. And then he left. He just left. And Lambert, of course, called the police because a random guy came to her house and forced her to cook him a meal at gunpoint. I don't know if maybe he was a transient and he was that desperate for a meal that he just went to a random woman's house and said, "Cook me some food because I'm about to lose it." But she contacted the police, and the police came and arrested Eugene Rogers, and literally they immediately deemed him a suspect in the Jacob Cohen murder because of this event, because he held a woman up in her home and made her cook him a meal. Like, this is, you can't make this stuff up. And so there's no relation between the two. You've got one guy doing something, and then they're trying to say that he was responsible for something else. I mean, if it's only 2 days down the road, and this guy goes to some random woman's house and pulls off this strange feat, but it's not even, they're not even related. You know, there's different weapons involved, there's different locations, the motives, the types of people, like nothing synced up between the two. But it's 1930, it's a troubling case, and, you know, whenever something like that happens, people want a resolution. God, I hate people. No, so I'm just sitting there vlogging, just minding my own damn business. This, you know, security guy with clearly nothing better to do in his life, just forget, he walks past me, walks around the corner of the Halleck Macmillan building that I'm sitting at, and then comes back a second. I'm literally just sitting there on the steps vlogging, and he comes back and he decides to stop and stand like 10 feet down from me and just loiter there while I'm doing my video. It's just like, pardon my language. I mean, I guess I already had to note my channel as not safe for children, because otherwise I'd have to go through all 600 videos and mark them each individually, and I ain't got time for that. So I guess I'm not worried about it, but fuck that guy. Get a life. Anyway, as an introvert, nothing annoys me more than trying to do something like this and having someone stand right next to me just staring at me the whole time. But anyway, I was pretty much done with the story anyway. So, joke's on you. Because that was really the end of it. Eugene Rogers, the focus of the investigation, and, you know, but it's another one of these cases where that was really where the information dried up. Couldn't really find any more information on the matter after that. Whether this guy was actually convicted, you know, I'd like to say, like, there's no way he could have been convicted. They had absolutely nothing to get this guy on. The guy shows up at a woman's house with a gun, doesn't actually, you know, at least in the physical realm, assault her in any way. The guy at Jacob Cohen's place uses completely different weaponry. If Eugene Rogers had a gun, he wouldn't be coming in with an axe, having to do things the hard way, fighting with, you know, Jacob Cohen to the death. But he happened to be a man who wasn't white, and a man who was behaving strangely, to say the least. But I tell you, if this guy was the guy, and he stole a purse with $150 in it, which back in 1930 was obviously considerably more money, what's this guy doing breaking into people's houses and trying to force them to make him a meal? He could go to any restaurant in town and buy any meal he wanted with that kind of money. It just, none of it made sense. It was just getting a suspect, getting somebody for the crime, which happened a lot then, and unfortunately still happens now. And that's really where it ends, because I don't know, nor do I think this guy ever actually got genuinely, you know, indicted. I don't think Found nothing to show he went on trial, that he was convicted, that he was acquitted. I found nothing about Eugene Rogers in relation to this case, him actually being genuinely taken to task for it. And I think everybody pretty much knew that this guy wasn't really their guilty man. So as it stands, the way I see it, the murder of Jacob Cohen is still unsolved, really, when you get down to it. I mean, maybe this Rogers guy did it, and then again, any random lunatic in town could have done it. And again, this is where I wish this description of the guy that had the store next door to Cohen's place, who said that he saw someone loitering outside. I wish that newspaper, because they usually were good at, giving descriptions, because they wanted people, people read the newspaper a lot back then, and they wanted people to have this information so that, you go out about town, you'll know who to look for. But I found no detailed description of the individual that this guy that worked near Cohen, this guy that he saw. Nothing about his race, which would have been, pretty significant, because if he says there's a suspicious white guy lingering out front, that starts to make Rogers look a lot less guilty. Not that he looks very guilty to begin with. So just so many questions. We don't know exactly what instigated this event. We don't know who did it. We don't know why. We don't know why it was as brutal as it was. We only know that it happened. And we don't exactly know who did it. And that is where we are stuck, my fellow adventurers. I wish I had the solution for you, but sometimes these crimes just dry up. And on that uplifting note, thank you so much for watching. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another fresh episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Catch you next time.